I had never heard about this neighborhood called the Triangle District. I'd grown up here my whole life, and I just wanted to sort of see what it was and what happened, and the article alluded to the fact that there'd been some, it had been controversial.
Life was good for us.
We had a recreation center there when I was a kid, and we had a lot of activities there. They had nurseries there, and I remember we used to go there and take dance classes and piano classes and acting classes. So we had a lot of things to keep us busy.
And we'd tell our parents, oh, well, we're going down on the block, and it was no big deal, they were not, who was going to be there, so on, our friends, our classmates. We weren't in gangs or anything like that. We were just going to have a hot dog at the M&S or down on the block, and just for socializing and that type of thing.
M&S Pharmacy, Mitchell and Solomon, those were the names for those initials. And then across the street was Doc Gravely's pharmacy. We had the Tight Squeeze, we had Ferguson Hotel, we had Ferguson Theater, and there was the KP Club, there was the Garnet restaurant right across the street from the school called the Yellow Jacket Inn. There were homes all up and down this street. The only thing left now that we have are our two churches and Garnet School and this foundation building. But the block consisted of everything that was a black business and homes.
It was wild. It was wild. But it was an area where blacks could socialize and intermingle. And it was the only black theater, the only black theater in Charleston was in the Triangle District, and the only black hotel. Of course, we didn't go to the other hotels or other theaters, but there was a black theater there. It was called Ferguson Theater. And that was one of our social outlets on Sundays. We'd go down and see a movie at the theater. And we'd meet friends there and have a soda at the corner soda fountain.
Twice a month, SIPI Presents would have the different musical organizations to come through, the big bands, Buddy Johnson, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Lionel Hampton, Erskine Hawkins, and any number of jazz groups, the Mills Brothers, the Ink Spots, you name it.
Growing up, I was exposed to blues, and at the time they called it rhythm and blues. That's what I was exposed to, mainly. That's the kind of music that my mother had. We had an old wind-up Victrola. It's one that you wind up and you turn it loose and let it play. We had those old 78 RPM records, and you put a needle in it, and when the needle went bad, you just put a nail in there and play the records, or you come down to the race record shop and buy a needle, and she would allow us to come downtown and buy the records, bought the old 78s, and that's the kind of music I was exposed to.
I really get nostalgic for those days. They were good days. And we were, for the most part, what you might classify as poor, but we thought we had it all. We thought we were rich. We knew we didn't live in mansions, but we had good clothes. We had clean clothes. We went to school. We had friends. We had good parents. We had fun at even going to church.
We lived in a neighborhood where if you did something bad, you got punished twice. You got punished by those who caught you, and then they would pass the word to your house, and when you got home, your mother would punish you.
One watched out for the other. Yes. We grew up in those types of communities, right, which are sadly lacking nowadays.
You see in the picture book, because people had nice houses and nice homes, and they kept the yards, and and the children are clean and well groomed, and the lawns well groomed. But now you don't see nothing but a lot of pavement, a lot of bottles and debris and stuff on the streets and floor.
In fact, my mother bought this house for herself when we were having to move out of the Triangle. But she loved the Triangle, so that she decided, we went all over town trying to find something for us with 7 children that we could afford. So she gave us this house.
I had a great sense of pride in the Triangle District because of my mother and our parents have taught us pride and taught us that anything anybody else can do, you can do too.
You may think I speak grammatically today, but I can tell you that I don't speak any better grammatically today than I spoke when I left a black teacher in the 6th grade.
The education that we received when we were separate but equal in Garnet was far superior to the education that the children receive now, for the simple reason we had instilled in us an education is a must. If you're going to succeed, if you're going to have something, and if you're going to have good work habits, you've got to have an education.
We had students there from all over this county, from as far as Rand, West Virginia, and as far, I guess you say west, would that be west? Yeah, as St. Albans. And students came from all over that area. They passed all the white schools to get to Garnet.
I went to Boyd Elementary and junior high school on Jacob Street. There you had teachers that loved you, that knew your parents, that saw to it that you learned well, and that you were disciplined. Because if you did not do what they told you to do, they knew that when you got home, the message would be there, and you were taken care of.
You wouldn't graduate from Garnet High School. You wouldn't come out of that school over there if you couldn't read or write.
And we were blessed. I mean, things that we hear that are going on in the schools now just did not happen in our schools.
We went to segregated schools through high school and also through college. And the teachers were very good. We had excellent teachers in these schools, but many of the courses were limited because of the lack of interest and lack of the number of students.
In Boyd Junior High School, for instance, we got books that weren't new. I noticed it at that time, but I didn't understand why, and I didn't know that I should have questioned it then because I wasn't old enough to understand why I should question it. I really didn't question it, but I noticed that we got books that weren't new, algebra books, and now I know that we were getting algebra books in the 9th grade that we should have gotten in the 7th grade or what have you. And I noticed that in Boyd Junior High School we were getting sporting equipment that were used. In Garnet High School in the 10th grade, we were getting sporting equipment that were used. We were getting from other schools, from Roosevelt or from Charleston High School or what have you. But you didn't question those kinds of things because you don't understand why you're doing this, and it's just something that you feel that is supposed to happen in the dual school system, which you don't question that because you really don't understand that.
My first teaching assignment in integrated schools was at West Virginia State College, from which I graduated. But there were people there about my own age, and I found out readily that they didn't attend the same kinds of elementary schools that we attended. They simply didn't. I don't know whether it was because we were segregated or in spite of it, but we had the edge there.
But in certain sections and sectors of West Virginia, things went fine, but there were a lot of sectors that things didn't go so well because there were a lot of whites that didn't want to sit in classrooms with blacks, and they thought that you know, they were superior and we were inferior. But all in all, an education is an education. If you know what 2 and 2 is, and I know what 2 and 2 is, we both come up with a 4, don't we?
And Brown versus Board of Education, I think, did a lot more harm than it did good, in a sense. Brown versus Board of Education, all Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP were asking was equality. But Brown versus Board of Education went well beyond that. And for instance, here in Charleston, we lost virtually a whole culture.
Well, we were known as the school experiencing integration in reverse. And it was a smooth thing for all intents and purposes.
We had 2 battles to fight. We fought on 2 fronts. We fought racism and we fought nepotism. And we really didn't identify nepotism until we had gone the distance with racism. And then the courts had started turning over racism, said, well, you know, you've gone far as you can with racism. Then we really identified nepotism, and we had to start fighting on that front. But anyway, we started fighting that 2-pronged battle, and we became successful. We had to go to the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond, Virginia, just to break the barriers down to the FOP.
Work wasn't available here for blacks in the Charleston area during those days.
Go to the Kanawha County Public Library, and I remember that as a youth. Couldn't get a book out of Kanawha County Public Library, couldn't go to it, and my mother was paying taxes to run that. I've always had a problem with that. You know, couldn't get a book out of there, and she's paying taxes. She's cleaning up people's houses, making $3 a day in bus fare, and go to the grocery store and buy a loaf of bread, paying taxes on that bread to support the Kanawha County Public Library, and I couldn't go there and get a book. That always bothered me.
And I came back here, back home, and went to work, went to look for a job at Union Carbide, and they turned me right back at the gate and said, we don't hire no colored here.
I remember my husband was in school. I rode the bus down to Greensboro, North Carolina, and they had the bathroom colored and white, and on the buses, everything had to sit at the back of the bus and do all this, but it wasn't any incident where anybody was killed or put in jail or anything here. My husband was never in jail for the civil rights.
Germany and New York, we went out all the time together, but we couldn't do it when we got back to the States. And we were in Maryland, and we couldn't go any place off post.
There may have been, I think there were a few cross burnings here. I think there was a family up in Bell or in that area.
Voting is a problem here for us in West Virginia. We were never denied our rights to vote.
The mayor who oversaw the clearing of the Triangle District basically said, you know, this was a mistake, it wasn't done right, you know, the people who lived in this neighborhood were treated poorly. And so, you know, I think that's a victory in itself, that you can see that there was a shift in the way that people talked about race in Charleston, and it was sort of seen and wasn't invisible after the protests.
It was a trying time.
The proudest of my life is my activity with CORE, the Congress on Racial Equality.
Individuals from all walks of life that were participating with us, black, yellow, and brown, were marching.
Well, I saw white kids in there, and they had no problems, but at the time, being a child, I really didn't understand the ramifications of why they ran me out. I really never thought of it until I got old enough to realize what the problems was. You know, I just thought maybe that that was something that was supposed to happen.
Proudest moment? Break that diamond. To break that diamond down, as he was determined that he would not break, but he did. We didn't need to do any more after that. We could just slide.
The idea of segregation, you know, you couldn't, let's say you couldn't go down there and you couldn't be in this and you couldn't do this. But we won out in the long run.
When we speak of losing all of our black businesses because of integration, I totally disagree that was so bad. When we have integration now, it brought on a whole new middle class of black people. We had no clerks in banks. We had no clerks in grocery stores. We had no employees in the utility companies. We had none of that before integration. Integration was the best thing that ever happened to this country.
I'd like them to remember that some very important people came out of there, including myself. Were born there and lived there and grew up there. And there were a lot of them.
Honorable, honest, intelligent, just a fine black woman. Staunch, respected, and could have been a leader in any cause.
And she was a great lady. Great lady. And she was very outspoken, and she knew exactly what she was talking about. I mean, she just wasn't talking to hear herself talk, you know. And she's helped a lot of, and her husband too, helped a lot of young people as far as college and in the community.
She was vocal. She used her voice and her influence as a local businesswoman to make a difference. Leon Sullivan was a civil rights activist. In fact, he was focused on local civil rights, but primarily on apartheid in South Africa. That whole racist system, which he helped dismantle. He was a personal friend of Nelson Mandela. Leon Sullivan, before he died, received many, many honors, some of which were long overdue. Leon Sullivan was one of the greatest men I ever knew.
We had Elizabeth Gilmore, we had Cynthia Burks, we had Moses Newsom. Oh, there were quite a few outspoken individuals at that particular time. And most of the black ministers in the city of Charleston were with the movement of CORA, NAACP, and other entities that had sit-ins at different stores that wouldn't serve us, but yet and still they wanted our business.
I must say that I was the first black salesperson in the city of Charleston.
I was the first black principal of a major high school, you know, since integration. And I thought, hey, that's great. You know, I might put that on my tombstone.
Of ease with which the city leaders kind of targeted it as a place, and then the way that citizens weren't substantively involved in figuring out what the projects would look like. They were given some lip service, but they weren't really involved. You know, this was their community. I don't think that would happen had it been a white neighborhood.
I really don't think there was any racism involved. It could have been in people's mind. It could have been a fact. If you look at the typology, if you look at the terrain of the city of Charleston, Probably the interstate took the route that was best suited for
They
it.
started that interstate after I came back home in the 60s. And it brought the cities closer together, of course, more easily accessible. It started after the interstate was built. It took me half the time to get to work.
The interstate has enhanced Charleston, but when you flip the corner over, look, some people will say that it displaced people. Yeah, and you know, it displaced the whole black neighborhood, but I don't think it displaced the black neighborhood just for political purposes. I don't think that is what happened.
When they built the gas company down there, had those people to move, and I don't even think they used that building for anything.
So, and then what really hurt me, hurt a lot of people, you know, and this is not of our doing, this is not what we want, and yet all of our lives are disrupted and all of our lives are affected by these changes. And we don't have any control. People were being displaced, you know, and some of those people I remember were not well at the time, some of those seniors, and some of them, you know, died. I think that hastened some of their deaths.
The interstate didn't hurt the block that much as it did the Triangle area. And the Triangle area, not only did it hurt the blacks, it hurt the low-earning whites as well, because the way it came down Pennsylvania Avenue and made the turn to go up Piedmont Road, there were a lot of white businesses, plus it wiped out the entire Triangle.
I remember the very last service we had in that church. I was there that morning. I can hear that lady screaming. She was a very dear friend. Her husband and my father were good friends, and she was a very nice lady. She saw all of us grow up, and it hurt her so badly, and she screamed. Sometimes I can hear her screaming. And they were tearing down our church. The bulldozers were there that morning.
The mayor that immediately followed, the mayor who oversaw the clearing of the Triangle District, basically said, you know, this was a mistake, it wasn't done right, you know, the people who lived in this neighborhood were treated poorly. And so it was, you know, I think that's a victory in itself, that you can see that there was a shift in the way that people talked about race.
It's kind of hard for me to predict what's going to happen. For us as a people, or even for us in this community, it's just a little bit hard the way things are going. You can predict something, and then next month it's all shot to pieces, you know.
Well, if they get rid of the drug down there, it should go real well. I'd like to see it like it was when I grew up.
We just don't know. There not too many people live up there now. They've all moved out and have grown.
They must, in a sense, forge their own block, build their own block. We can only pass on to them the knowledge or the skills or the intelligence, the wherewithal. But it's up to them to take the ball and run with it.
Oh, for Wirtz Avenue, the only thing I think about on Wirtz Avenue is that the trees are going to enclose us, and we'll be stamped out.
My vision is that things will be better as Martin Luther King predicted. That we will get to the promised land, you know, that we will have the strength to overcome the obstacles. We know the obstacles are there and they're always going to be there. But we will have the wisdom and the intelligence and the strength to go through the storms.
I think the future is great as long as they include the people in making decisions.